welcome back to another episode of Card Talk, a podcast where we spend a little bit of time talking about cards from Lord of the Rings, the card game. I'm your host, Dave Walsh.
And I'm Ted Bannock, and I love talking about cards. I do. Just cards and more cards. Bring it on. Bring it on, David.
And before we talk about this particular card, first thing we want to say is that Grant is working today, so we had to record another episode without him. So
he's not riding along today.
He's not along for the ride.
He's English, so I assume he's having tea or something. Is that a fair assumption? Like a tea and biscuits type situation? That's just what I assume.
Second breakfast.
Second breakfast. He's having second breakfast. That's right.
Yeah. And with the time difference, it's probably dinner or supper. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you know who does make this show work out really well is all of our patrons, right, Ted?
All of our patrons. That's right.
And so we'd like to thank all the patrons that we have. And if anybody's interested in becoming a patron of Card Talk, please join us, donating $1 or more. And you too can receive some of the special benefits of becoming a patron. And just go to Card Talk, Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/cardtalk2018 and sign up. Thank you so much to all of our patrons. So Ted, this is an interesting show. We're going to talk a little bit about an event, but what event are we going to be talking about?
Today's card on Card Talk is Strider's Path. Strider's Path is it's a lore event released in the Hunt for Gollum AP. Cost 1, and it has a response. After a location is revealed from the encounter deck, immediately travel to that location without resolving its travel effect. If another location is currently active, return it to the staging area.
Huh. My cuts, short or long, don't go wrong.
That was the first thing I was going to talk about, was the sweet, sweet flavor text on this
I know. I love that, because that's where I think the hobbits are complaining that Strider took them on supposedly a shortcut through the shortcut, and they're like, this shortcut's not short. And he's like, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's the way we're going.
And it's really representative in the picture too. The card art is phenomenal. Like I love it. I love the card art on that.
Yeah, I do too. It just shows like a wilderness path, and it's not. I love it how it's not. Before we jump into the mechanics of the card, right? Like it's not Aragorn's path; it's Strider's path.
Right.
It's like that persona of him in the wilderness taking a shortcut. So it hits a thematic, it gives me a feel goods.
Yeah. It's well thought out and it's well executed, I think, is the kind of the way that I look at it. But what about that response? What's the deal?
So it's an older card, right? Like I said, it came out in the first AP.
Yeah, and the Hunt for Gollum, right? Which was a crazy. Anyways, it's a weird. That was a weird mechanic of a quest, anyways. Like that, that Hunt for Gollum with you have to reveal cards and do all sorts of weird stuff and things like that.
Yeah, I tend to romanticize a few of the earlier cards from the Mirkwood cycle, because the game was very new. Like if you were playing the game at that time, you were like starving for new cards, right? Just like more content. And I remember for this AP, very specifically, I'd ordered it online because my local retailer didn't have it, and I was like waiting for the delivery guy. I was like a dog, like waiting for their owner to come home. I was like waiting for the delivery guy. Like, where is this guy? I had like a buddy over. We were like waiting for the new AP to come to see like what the first expansion of this game looked like.
Right.
And I remember opening up, and on the first, it's always the hero. So we got Lord Bilbo in this pack.
Right.
And then I think right underneath it, I got into the lower card. I think Strider's Path then was like the first card underneath it. So like those two were like the first images I saw aside from the core set.
Right. And it's funny because when we decided to record the episodes without Grant today, it's a tough decision for us to make. But then I said, why don't we talk about some of your favorite cards? And that kind of harkens back to, how you got involved with the show with Gandalf and stuff like that. But, so it's interesting to hear, kind of you, not necessarily as the host of Card Talk, but just as a fan of the game, talking about what this card means to you. That's kind of an interesting story. So get into it, Ted. Why do you love this card?
So I mean, even today, in today's current card pool, it has an interesting effect to essentially negate a travel effect. So this was the first card to do it, and it does two things. Like, one, it negates the travel effect, and two, it takes the threat of that location out of the staging area by immediately traveling to it, right? So if it's like a 4-threat location, you essentially took a card out of the staging area that you're questing in. So you immediately are going to be putting progress to getting rid of the location. So it kind of hits like on two fronts for a single resource.
Right. This is one of those cards, my take on it is that this is one of those cards that I don't play often, playing solo most of my career in Lord of the Rings. And I always find that kind of managing travel effects are low on my priority list when I'm building a solo deck. One of the problems with building solo decks, as you know, but for the audience, is that you needed to do everything. You needed to be able to quest, attack, and defend are the 3 priorities, but then you need to be able to probably card draw is probably the most important card effect to have your deck do. You can't just keep top decking the whole game. If you're not doing that, you need resource acceleration, or even if you are drawing, you need resource acceleration. It's like there's just so many things that a solo deck has to do that when you put a card in your deck that solely deals with just travel effects, you think, well, what can you do that deals with travel effects and 7 other things? And I don't know if there's anything else that deals with travel effects, and also does other things. But that's one of the reasons why I don't really play Strider's Path, is because I'm solo. But I can imagine that when you're playing multiplayer, that this card increases its maybe 2 players its sweet spot, but this increases its
two players. It's good. It's especially good in your opening hand. It has the most impact if you get it in your opening hand and the scenario does not have an active location to begin with. Because if you do have one, right, you're trading it. But if you don't have one that first turn, you're immediately traveling to it. So again, the first turn we have the least amount of willpower, usually, unless you're doing really bad,
or really good, or really good.
Yeah. So it has the most impact there. And yeah, multiplayer, definitely good. And yeah, it's an event. It's only good one time. And the economy is like I'd compare to, you can kind of look at it like West Road Traveler if you want a card to do more. Like West Road Traveler does a similar thing where she's an ally that has 2 willpower, and her response is to trade the active location with another one.
Right.
So that might be that might be a better solo card, for example. I think is maybe what you're talking about.
Yeah,
right,
something
where it
that does
more,
does multiple things.
Yeah.
Like I think that's what you need to have if you're playing in a solo deck. So, and that's actually where I was going. I think that like, what is it? Thror's map.
So,
and how about this? I mean, I don't. It's obvious, probably to our listeners, that I don't play this card. Maybe beyond when I first got Hunt for Gollum, but so this is your show more than anything. So yeah. So what about it?
Well, the other comment I'll make is, yeah, that's a good point, David. Is it got overshadowed by other things that negate travel effects? And have we done a Thror's map episode? I know
we have not. Nope.
Yeah. So we'll have to dive into that. But there's, at least at the time this is being recorded, so Thror's map has been officially errated once, where it has gone from an action to a travel action.
Right.
And just to remind the listeners what it does, it's not now a travel action where you one cost attachment where you exhaust it to make a location the active location. Incredibly powerful effect. There's been like I don't know if there's been like, it's one of those mystery errata cards where there's like a looming I think errata for it, or
Well,
it's rumored.
They did reprint it with the errata on it. We had Caleb on the show the other day, and he was talking about how the fact just isn't high on his priority list, and so they may right. So I think that you have to discard Thror's map. You just can't keep using it. So
this card got overshadowed by Thror's map when it came out, because Thror's map was such an incredible card. Now with the pending errata on Thror's map where you have to discard it, Thror's map is now a one-time use effect. So I think now all the other cards that let you negate travel effects become much more relevant, because now Thror's map is not the go-to card anymore. It's not the best.
But, isn't it still the best? What's Thror's map's cost?
It is 1, so it's the same cost, and it's an attachment rather than an event. So,
I mean, is it just doing the same thing?
It's kind of doing the same thing. It's just that it's an action though. So I think Strider's Path is a little bit better because, like I said, this is a response now. You get to immediately do it, and now that you have to discard Thror's map, it does it at action speed, which is slower than the response speed of Strider's Path. So I got really excited when I actually heard that, because, all right, Thror's map is getting nerfed. Oh, Strider's Path is now now it's like a much more viable choice when you look at all the effects in the card pool.
Yeah, and I think that right there, I think maybe is the thing to hang your hat on. If you're playing location control and you need to control locations, or even just nasty travel effects, it seems like the travel effects are becoming nastier and nastier, especially with the errata on Thror's map that was probably printed sometime last cycle. That there's just some crazy travel effects that happen, and so so I think that maybe you're right. Maybe the Strider's Path card is good for that location control, but again, I'm not sure how viable right now location control is as a solo deck,
Yeah, it's probably less important, because in multiplayer, like two player and multiplayer, you're almost guaranteed a location every turn. I mean, it depends on the scenario. Multiplayer, like when you're doing 3-4 cards, there's tons of locations.
Right.
And 2-player, like a majority of the time, there's at least one location to go to.
Yeah.
But in solo, when you're only doing one card, I could see that, where like there's only one card coming out of turn, right?
Right.
So,
and you can pick when you travel, and you can set up for travel effects that are coming off and things like that. Sometimes if you're playing multiplayer, you probably have to travel every turn, and the choice doesn't come when to travel. The choice comes which location to travel to. So you have to take those crazy travel effects if they come up. And so, and let me be clear, I don't think that this necessarily has to go into a location control deck by any stretch of the imagination. I just think that for my building style, I'm putting in a whole bunch of other cards before I put in these sorts of cards like Thror's map. Thror's map is awesome pre-errata, but I just didn't build with it. I mean, I get why everybody loves it, but I just never built with it because travel effects are like low on my list of things to worry about in a solo deck.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But yeah, if you're playing multiplayer, and if you know the scenario, it's a great sideboard card too. If the scenario you're gonna play against, like, oh, this scenario has lots of travel effects, just because some scenarios have less and some have more. Some have forced effects that you can't avoid anyway. But it's also good too against the scenarios where there's some locations that have an effect that read like while they're in the staging area. So it's like, while they're in the staging area, enemies get +1 attack, or this and this. It gives you just another chance to just rip to the location immediately without, like, even still while you're revealing cards, right? The first card comes at the location, you travel there, and its effect in the staging area, if it has one, is gone.
Right. I'm trying to look up Thror's map because Thror's map is actually a unique attachment. And that becomes
Yeah.
so you can't have
Yeah.
3 of them out. As opposed to Strider's Path, you can have 3 of them in your hand, and then if you're playing multiplayer, you can be like, don't want this, don't want this, don't want, like, although I don't know that you would play 3 Strider's Path in one turn unless.
No, because you would just be changing out the location you just put in. You'd be like swapping it out again.
Right. Unless, like, I mean, there is probably corner cases where, like, you pull off one and it's like, ooh, this is bad. And you put it up and you bring it down and you're like, ooh, here's the Gladden Marshlands. This is even worse. And then this is worse. Because you have to do it as they're revealed. You can't wait for all of them to, right? Like, so technical play point, you have to, like, one location is revealed. You have to make the decision to use it. And you can't stage all 4 of your cards and then play Strider's Path.
Yeah.
So.
But again, if you're playing Lord Aragorn and a location comes out, you're like Strider's Path, you get some feel goods. You're like,
right.
Strider's taking his path.
Right. Is there any particular hero that this card seems to work better with or not better with? It doesn't seem to me that there is, but I mean, obviously lore of some sort.
It's the number 1, I'd say, is anyone that interacts with locations. The biggest one being Idrian, the spirit hero. So if you're playing spirit and lore, and there's a lot of, when you're playing her, there's a lot of interaction there between spirit and lore and location stuff.
Right.
Because she is the response that when a location is active, when a location is explored, she gets to ready.
Right.
So if she's questing, and let's say last turn you didn't have a location to travel to, and one ggets revealed, you can now travel there, and then she'll ready that turn.
Right.
Because you now have an active.
Right.
So it's a card for her kit, I'd say, if you're going to splash. And you can, if you're playing one lore hero, you can splash this card in. It only costs 1 resource. So you can always afford it.
Right. And I guess, again, just a point of clarity is that this allows the location to become active before you place the progress, right? So that way you can explore the location. Like if it's, I don't know, 28 threat and only 2 quest points, right? You can put it up and you can quest through it that turn. You don't have to wait until the next turn because you get to put the location up into the, right? Am I being clear about what I mean here?
Yeah. It immediately becomes active, so essentially you're exploring the location the same turn it comes out.
Right, and you hope that you have enough progress to put on it, right?
Yeah, you could run into that too, but right, it could be like a really low threat a location with a high quest point value. Like 2 and 6 or something.
Right. I'm thinking of what is that? From the core set, there was the Brownlands, right, which has 6 threat or 5 threat and 1 quest point. Like, this is that's kind of probably the meta target for this, right?
Yeah, when I was playing those quests right early on, that was like the sweetest card to play it on because you would travel there, and its effect too of the Brownlands was to immediately put 1 progress on itself.
Right.
So if you Strider's Path it just immediately went away.
Right.
It was very, very satisfying. You just you essentially canceled the whole encounter card.
Right. Right. Which is amazing. And especially if you were playing that solo. Imagine playing that solo and you just basically cancel the whole turn from the encounter deck. That would be, that's crazy with, so, I mean, I guess we could sit here and talk all day about it, but I mean, should we try to ring this guy?
Yeah, let's go ahead and ring it.
Okay, so for anybody who doesn't know who is new to the podcast or has forgotten, we have a highly arbitrary yet scientific system where we rank cards on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is the 1 card to rule them all, and 10 is the card that we throw back into the fiery chasm from whence it was made. Thanks, Phil, by the way, for giving me that line. Phil, one of our dedicated listeners and patrons. But anyways, Ted, it's your card, so I'll let you go first. How would you ring this?
Yeah, I'm kind of all over the board.
I know.
Like I've given crazy ratings to crazy cards. Like,
let's just say that nobody's holding you to these these ring ratings.
Yeah, like I said, I think with the sort of reprint pending around on Thror's map, this card becomes very viable against all the other travel effects. It's easily playable. It does the job of, like I said, potentially it takes threat out of the staging area depending on the situation. Helps you get rid of its encounter card control, like location control, and it's one of my favorite cards. Like I said, so I'm gonna give it a 3. 3 rings for me.
3 rings. And so I'm gonna politely disagree, only because I think it's because of our play styles, right? And so I see the potential of this card playing multiplayer and playing where you're trying to reveal lots, but I think this card loses a little bit in solo for all the reasons that I've said. And so, and not that it's not a powerful card, or not that it's not a good card. Every once in a while, somebody will argue with me about my own ring ratings, right? I'll get into it, and I'll have to say, but it's my opinion based on the way that I play. So, for solo play, I just don't usually deal with trying to manage travel effects unless it's a really nasty. There's a couple of them in the Arid Mithrin cycle that I like, the King's Quest and things that that have some nasty.
King's Quest is a great example where I had to side in a bunch of location control cards to help.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, but other than that, I'm really not. I'm not looking at Strider's Path, not because it's not good, but just because it's not fitting with my play style. So based on my own play style, I'm gonna say that I'm ready for it. I'm ready for it for all you listeners. Based on my play style, I'm gonna give this an 8. 8 rings.
An 8. Ooh.
Yeah.
8.
And that's just because of my own thing. Ted, it fits right in with the way that you play, because you play multiplayer and things like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, it's like very satisfying, especially first turn, and just give it a go. If you're playing 2 or more players, you're playing one lore hero, and you have an extra slot, give it a shot.
Yeah. Totally, and it fits right in with your every card has a place, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, well, join us again as we talk about more cards from the game. We'll see you later, everybody. And if you're interested in finding this or any of our back episodes of Card Talk, feel free to search YouTube, where you can find our flagship video episodes with the username Card Talk 2018. Or you can search the RSS feed, cardtalk2018.libsyn.org, for our extended audio versions of our podcast. Or you can find us on Facebook at Card Talk 2018. And if you have any questions for Grant or myself, or for both of us, feel free to email us at cardtalk2018@gmail.com.